we've got a few new faces on here. Why don't we go around the room, introduce ourselves, and then we'll get started. So, Marco, you're top of my list. Go ahead.
Marco Monteblanco, president of the Washington FOP. Glad to be here this morning.
Okay, Jeff, you're next.
Jeff and I, state treasurer.
Travis, go ahead and introduce yourself. What lodge you're from?
Travis Watkins with the Yakima Lodge, treasurer.
I'm not. Holt, you're next on my list.
Hey, Spokane Lodge President, Holt Woodhill.
And we have one of our labor attorneys, Jim David.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's Jim David.
And of course, my name is James Shumsher. I'm the West Side Vice President and Legislative Chair. And with that, I will turn it over to Michael and let him introduce himself.
Well, good morning, everybody. For the record, my name is Michael Transu, and I'm here today representing the Washington State Fraternal Order of Police. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 55th Legislative Day, Saturday. We continue to be between House of Origin Policy Cutoff and House of Origin Cutoff. And it may sound like a broken record, but I always feel like it's important to talk just a second about the process we're going through. So by next Wednesday at 5 p.m., House bills that are still alive need to be passed out of the House, and Senate bills to still be alive need to have passed out of the Senate. Both bodies are working pretty diligently on moving things as much as they can and as much as their politics allow through their bodies. I would note that the last couple of nights, both bodies have went pretty late. The House went until about 1:30-ish a.m. On Thursday night. The Senate went and worked until about 10:30-ish last night, which for the Senate is really, really late. They tend to knock off a little bit more on the earlier side and such. So we continue to work through that process. And once we get through next Wednesday at 5 o'clock, we will have a much better handle and understanding on the things that are moving through the process and remain in play as the legislature goes through the better part of the second half of the session. As I mentioned on these calls before, that is with one big ginormous caveat, that bills necessary to implement the budget are exempt from everything I just said. So it's a world in which budgets can make bills come back alive if the party who's running the budget believes that a particular policy bill is important enough to be referenced in a budget. So so we're just kind of continuing to move through the process. My sleep is dwindling every evening as we move along. And being up on the third floor, for those of you who have been up there walking around on marble all day, is something that can wane on you. So having said all of that, I'm going to start and go through the agenda, and James, I'll pause a little bit after each one to see if there are any questions in the chat, or if either you or Marco or anybody else is getting any questions via text. So first item on the agenda for today is the Blake Fix update. And for those of you who don't know, that is Senate Bill 5536. That bill was the bill that passed out late yesterday evening. The Senate was in caucus a lot during the day to count votes and look over and react to amendments. They were in caucus a lot on this. I understand that the vote counts kind of came and went as the day or as the afternoon progressed. And I think at around like 8:30-ish, they went back on the floor and started running the bill. There was a question, kind of early in the evening as to whether or not they had the votes, they had the time, and they had the wherewithal to, run the legislation. But they did. There were, so that everybody knows, about 2, 4, 6, 8, about 15, 16 amendments on 5536. A few of them were withdrawn as the afternoon and the evening progressed. So that tells you a little bit about the discussions that were going on behind the scenes in the caucuses. Several of the amendments were adopted, one's by Representative Robinson, one by Senator Mullet, and a couple by Senator Dingra. Largely kind of clarifying amendments for all intents and purposes. So, here we go with a brand new piece of legislation that moved off of the House floor. The bill in and of itself, what I would call, made some changes to the bill that passed out of Ways and Means. And again, contained things like requiring drug testing to be done within the 45-day time frame at the State Patrol lab. Requires the state, and this was a big deal in committee, to reimburse local courts for the costs associated with folks getting substance use disorder treatment. Requires post-conviction diagnostic evaluation. Removes some requirements that courts notify the Department of Health for somebody's failure to follow through with treatment. And provides that courts may not sanction individuals for failing to comply with recommended treatment if the individual has made reasonable efforts to comply and couldn't comply for things like their indigency or lack of funding for treatment. On local opioid treatment programs, there was an amendment that was inserted in the striking amendment that restored the requirement for the Department of Health to hold a hearing in the community before approval of citing an opioid treatment facility, and also had a provision in it that prohibited the health department from a health engagement hub from providing supervised injection services. So there was a lot in the substitute, again, different than what the bill was when it came out of committee. Probably the most important thing I want to talk about just briefly is the vote on 5536. As everybody knows, to pass a bill in the Senate, one needs 55 votes. As everybody knows, to pass a bill in the House, you need 50 votes. And sometimes in my world, we talk about 25, 50, and 1 to get a bill passed. So 25 in the Senate, 50 in the House, and the 1 is the governor's office to sign a bill. The vote moving 5536 off the House floor last evening was 28 to 21. It was a very respectful, conscientious debate, a lot of differing opinions on whether a piece of legislation like this ought to be heavy on the consequences side or more heavy on the treatment side. The folks who ultimately voted for it, I think, took the position that this is a good, happy medium in terms of treatment, consequences, and accountability. And remember, those are the 3 pillars that we, the FOP, look to as we've been kind of analyzing this bill as it moves through the process. I think from my perspective and our perspective, I think the Senate floor amendment added a little bit more on the consequences side. So it reinstated a 45-day jail requirement for folks that was in the Senator Solomon bill, you may recall. But so folks who voted yay on the bill, so that everybody who's on the call or who watches this can understand maybe where their particular senator was. So voting yay were Senators Billig, Binky, Braun, Cleveland Conway, Dozier, Fortunato, Gildon, Hawkins, Holy, Hunt, Kaiser, King, Leas, Lovick, McCune, Mullet, Mazzal, Randall, Robinson, Rolfus, Solomon, Shoemake, Torres, Vandewey, Wagner, Jeff Wilson, and Linda Wilson. And I haven't looked to see how that 28 breaks out, but it is a really decent mix of Democrats and Republicans, for those of you who know the names that I just kind of tweaked off. So again, a lot of moderate folks who voted for that. And on the no side, folks who voted no on the bill moving out were Senators Dinger, Frame, Hasagawa, Kaufman, Cooterer, Lovelet, Jim McCune, Senators Nguyen, Noble, Senator Padden, Senator Peterson, Senator Rivers, Saldana, Senators Schessler and Short, and Senators Stanford, Trudeau, Valdez, Warnick, Wellman, and Wilson Clare. From Michael's perspective, for those of you who know what the typical bell curve looks like, you've got 20% on the left, about 20% on the right, and about 60% in the center. And I would tell you that vote count probably emulates that picture pretty well. You had some very conservative folks who didn't think the bill was consequential enough. You had some folks who were more left of center who didn't think the bill was treatment centered enough and probably too focused on consequences. And then you had the folks who voted aye, who are in that middle 60% that constituted 28 votes to move the bill off the Senate floor. So as I said, I sat up in the gallery last night, watched the entire debate, some very heartfelt speeches on both sides of the aisle. But I think it's a testament of, the process that we utilize. A lot of times this process gets criticized for lots of different reasons, but it was one of those processes where everybody's voice was, I think, heard. And I think everybody's voice was understood. And everybody was very respectful about the debate that happened last night, and everybody understood that there were just differing opinions. And you've gone through everything you've gone through in the first 54 days of the session to get to that point. And from the FOP's perspective, it's something that the striking amendment was something that we were supportive of and encouraged the bill to move forward in that fashion. So sorry to be so winded on that one, but it's an important bill, and it's something that we've worked and testified on as the bill has moved through the process, and a bill that will continue to be engaged in as we move through the House side of the process. So I'm going to stop there. James, Marco, anybody have any questions on the Blake Fix bill or Senate Bill 5536?
No, Michael, I think that was a great explanation. Glad to see that there was some bipartisan support there.
Yeah. Anything on your end, James?
The only thing I would add, it clearly defines certain things. It loosens the restrictions on field testing. So for the first time, people selling drug paraphernalia, we're going to be able to do a little bit more with. So, and it defines a list of what you could do for. So I thought that section's carefully, smartly thought out. So there is some good stuff in this bill. And like Michael and Marco said, I really appreciate the bipartisan work on this bill.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, on the upside, a lot of the stuff I mentioned last Saturday is going to hold true for this Saturday. So the rest of the discussion here, I think, can kind of move pretty quickly. And again, I'll pause as we move through this a little bit to see if there are any questions. So House Bill 1025, which is a piece of legislation that we continue to oppose, and that's the qualified immunity bill. It is still on the second reading calendar. And as I mentioned last Saturday, I think it had just gotten on the second reading calendar. So it's one of the bills that I think the D side, at least of the aisle, has got some members that have some concerns with that legislation. So will remain to be seen when that bill moves. Again, it's subject to the 5 p.m. Wednesday cutoff. I understand that it may be one of the bills that is ran today in the House. So we'll keep you posted on when that legislation moves along. Marco, I'll send an updated tracking list and report out probably tomorrow. So to the extent you ship that out, folks who look at that report, what I ship out tomorrow is going to be stale information come Monday. So when you see those reports, again, particularly when we're in this cutoff period and there's 3 more days till Wednesday at 5 o'clock, just know that that report is a snapshot in time. And so when the body goes back into session on Monday, all things are going to change and things moving are going to be added to that list. So we'll see how we go today. I don't expect the House to work tomorrow, but it is entirely possible, depending upon how the caucus goes today and the bills that they want to put up and run today. House Bill 1445, that's the Representative Hansen bill, 14 patterns and practices bill that we support. That bill is still in the Rules Committee. And remember, in the Rules Committee, there are, in theory at least, 3 levels or 2 votes that have to happen, but 3 levels in the Rules Committee. So once a bill comes out of a policy or a money committee, it goes into the Rules Committee and sort of sits on the bottom level. And then the process works. There is a vote that has to be taken to move it from what I would call the white sheet. And then there's a vote that moves it to the green sheet. And then there's another vote that moves it from the green sheet to the floor calendar. So as I've talked about before on these calls, the Rules Committee is really meant and intended to be the gatekeeper for the types, for the number, and for the bills that finally end up on the floor calendar for a full vote by the body. I'll just say it, back in the day, the Rules Committees always met in person, and the majority party would offer up things like 1 vote or 1 poll by each member from the white sheet to the green sheet, and then 2 polls from the green sheet to the floor calendar. As we've gotten through COVID, as we've gotten better electronically, at least in the House, and a lot in the Senate as well, a lot of those Rules Committee meetings now are being held electronically. So folks aren't getting together in person and doing those in-person votes or bumps, as I just mentioned. So House Bill 1445 is on that lowest level in the Rules Committee, but particularly in the House, what the majority party does is they will figure out which cadre of bills they want to put on the floor calendar, and then they will just electronically move everything from the bottom rung to the floor calendar in one fell swoop. So House Bill 1445 still has to be bumped from the Rules Committee to the floor calendar, and as of this morning, it still was sitting in Rules. Any questions on, I'm going to stop, pause there and see if there are any questions on 1025 and 1445. All right. So the next kind of cadre of bills are the vehicular pursuit bills, and I throw in there the working group and grant program bill. So House Bill 1363, which is the vehicular pursuit bill, which again, as I mentioned last week, puts back reasonable suspicion for everything but property crimes. And Chief James, just correct me if I'm wrong if I don't get that quite right. And that bill is still on the lowest rung in the Rules Committee. So if the body wants to bring it up and debate it, it's got to move from the bottom rung to the second reading calendar or the top rung. That bill is in a place where we think it's appropriate to move forward. It fits into those, kind of a happy medium, middle of the road. It doesn't go all the way. It doesn't include property crimes. But for purposes of moving forward, we think that bill strikes the right and proper balance in terms of vehicular pursuits. House Bill 1586, which is the working group and the grant bill, also sits in the bottom rung in the Rules Committee and also needs to be brought up to the second reading calendar if it's going to move forward. And let me step back. And so both of those bills passed out of transportation committees. And I wanted to remind everybody on 1363 that all of the Republicans voted for that vehicular pursuit bill coming out of transportation. A majority of the Democrats also voted for that bill moving out of the Transportation Committee, but notably 5 Democrats voted no of the vehicular pursuit bill moving out of committee. So I point that out to kind of contextualize what we talked about on 5536, and where there is, those folks who are, a little bit more left of left, and think that, the vehicular pursuits legislation and laws as they exist today have done things to protect particular communities, and believe that it's doing the right thing. And as I pointed out last Saturday, for those of you who haven't read, there's a really good op-ed by Senator Trudeau and Representative Mena on data as it relates to vehicular pursuits. And it struck a chord with me, mainly because at the FOP, we talk a lot about data-driven decisions. So it was a really good op-ed that I encourage everybody to go read, to just kind of obtain and look at that perspective on vehicular pursuits. The last bill is 5533, which is largely a companion to House Bill 1586. That bill died in the Ways and Means Committee, and that was Senator Lovick's bill, and a bill that we just really wanted to move forward. And as everybody knows, Senator Lovick is our legislator of the year last year. And in the Senate, in committees, motions pass out, and then it is always, quote, subject to signatures in the Senate. And so you can, hey, James, can you mute? So you can move a bill and vote a bill out of committee, but it's always in the Senate subject to signatures. And what happens is you can take a vote, and it's kind of hard to tell when you're in the audience, but you can take a vote, and then there's a board that you must sign that proves your vote in writing, rather than a roll call vote or anything like that. And it doesn't appear that 5536 got enough signatures in Ways and Means to move out. So while it appeared on a vote that it moved out, it didn't have enough signatures to move out. So it's a little nuance in the Senate side that is not and does not occur on the House side. So long and the short of it is, vehicular pursuits 1363 and working group and grant program 1586 are live in the House. They are in the Rules Committee and have to be bumped up to the second reading calendar to be considered by the body. And they have until Wednesday at 5 o'clock to do all of those things. So I'll stop there, see if there are any questions on vehicular pursuits.
Just a couple comments, Michael. So, obviously the FOP has looked at both of those bills, believe that both should go forward. We support both of them. Obviously, working group in talking about data is something we've always been about. We always want to talk about that data. I want to see about, best practices and how to push forward. But at the same time, the actual pursuit bill is it does create that balance. It brings a lot of it back, which to reasonable suspicion, minus the property crimes, but it gets us in a good place. I can't stress enough the importance of both of those bills going forward. And can't stress enough that the FOP is supporting both of them to go forward.
Yep, I agree with Marco. My apologies for having my mic on. My better half, also a police officer, reminded me that the data that was in the Trudeau and op-ed is actually done by the Pierce County Auditor's Office. So it's not the data that's been in dispute. It was an independent study just done of Pierce County. So when Michael says it's a good article, it strikes a chord, they actually use data collected by the Pierce County itself.
Yeah. Thank you, James. All right. Non-moving violations, House Bill 1513 also sits on the low rung in the House Rules Committee. So, that's a piece of legislation that we continue to be really concerned about, and, not quite, just one of those bills that we think, probably adversely impacts some proactive policing. There's some data out there that talks about only 0.27% of the Washington State Patrol non-moving stops over, I think, about a 9-year period resulted only 2.27% of 11 million stops resulted in finding some contraband or some other violation. And while 0.27 is a really small number in terms of 11 million stops, that does represent 29,700 times where either contraband, and I don't know, and we don't know what that 29,700 represented, but in 29,700 times on a non-moving violation stop, things occurred. And so while it's a very small percentage in terms of the overall period where the data was collected, it does represent almost 30,000 times where some extra drugs, some firearms or whatever happened. So that bill is still in the Rules Committee, and we'll see if the majority party in the House brings that up and moves it through. This is just Michael speaking. I can certainly envision a day or an afternoon or a morning where the House majority party brings a cadre, if you will, of police reform bills or law enforcement peace officer bills to the floor and run them at one particular time. With the exception of 1025, which, as I mentioned, was still on the second reading calendar and has been for a while. So, but again, we're moving to 5 p.m. on Wednesday. So there's a lot of pieces of legislation that are in the House Rules Committee. So it'll be interesting to see how late they go today and how much work they get done today, and whether or not they come in tomorrow to finish up some things. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions on non-moving violations. Hi. Independent prosecutor, House Bill 1579 is on the second reading calendar in the House. As everybody knows, that's a bill that we oppose this year for a lot of different reasons, and I'm not going to, go into the details on, the lack of independence, the conflicts of interest, and all of the other reasons why we just think that is not a bill that we want to move forward. So we're continuing to oppose that legislation, but it is on the second reading calendar and is available for the entire House to vote on the measure. Last bill on my list or on the agenda is Senate Bill 5424. Remember, that's the flexible work schedule bill. And that passed out the Senate day before day before yesterday on a really strong bipartisan 49-0 vote. So that bill will move over to the House and begin to go through the exact same process that the bill went through on the Senate. So I'm going to stop there and see if there are any questions on the last couple of bills I mentioned. Then I'm just going to pop through really quickly, James and Marco, just a few bills that are out there that, aren't on what I would call the high priority list, but are definitely ones we're still watching and ones that are moving through the process a little bit, if that's okay.
Go for it, man.
Okay. So interrupted military service credit. We've talked about that last couple of Saturdays. Substitute House Bill 1007. That's sponsored by Representative Paul that we support. It passed out of the House and is over in the Senate Ways and Means Committee. And I'll pause there for just a second. So after we get through next Wednesday at 5 p.m., House bills have passed the House, Senate bills have passed the Senate. And then we're going to go back into committee hearings from the 9th of March all the way down to the 29th of March. So about 20 days of committee hearings. And again, we'll go through the same polling process like we did with a House of Origin. And it's called opposite House cutoff. So just like we did on the front end of session, House bills that are in policy committees in the Senate need to be out by a certain day. House bills that are in the opposite bodies money committee needs to be out by a certain day. And then we have about the last 10 days in session where bills that are in dispute and such get debated by both bodies, and winding us down till April 23rd, which is the last day of the 2023 session. I'm not going to talk about 1200. We're still hopeful that there's a couple of bills out there with regard to local law enforcement funding, recruitment, and retention, sponsored by Representative Stokesbury and Senator Holy. And we're really hopeful that a couple of those bills can move forward so that local governments can have some extra dough at their disposal to recruit and retain, and in one bill authorize a sales tax that can be used for law enforcement facilities. So we're really hopeful that those bills can, find a way to move forward. Again, they're choices by local governments to increase funding for law enforcement in their communities. In gross substitute House Bill 1387, this is the Representative Ramos bill that created the non-sponsored applicant pool at the CJTC. And remember, a couple of Saturdays ago, or maybe even last Saturday, I talked about how that bill has been, has been made into a study bill. The House passed that recently, and this directs the CJTC to do some work on what a non-sponsored CJTC BLEA class would look like if it were not sponsored by local government. So the idea there is to have the state sort of sponsor a CJTC cohort, and then have that cohort available for law enforcement agencies to pick from. One of the things that we encouraged Representative Ramos to include in a piece of legislation like that was the idea that, gave the majority of the folks in that pool the ability to be picked up by smaller agencies, so that smaller agencies had the ability to, pick some of those applicants who were non-sponsored. And the idea is to, allow the larger agencies to have a little bit of the pool, but at the same time, to give the smaller agencies the benefit of a larger percentage of that pool of applicants. Let's see, it talked about that. Tribal police training, Senate Bill 5086 is in the Senate Rules Committee, a bill that we support. It allows the CJTC to enter into interlocal agreements with tribal communities to get tribal peace officers trained. So again, something that we support and something that we're encouraging the Senate to move forward, so that tribal police officers can have at least create an agreement with the CJTC to pay for their officers to move forward into the training commission. Substitute Senate Bill 5120 with regard to establishing 23-hour crisis relief centers passed out a few days ago out of the Senate with a really strong vote, and has been referred to the House Healthcare Committee. Remember, this is a bill that creates a crisis relief center, a couple of facilities in Phoenix, Arizona, where law enforcement drop-offs are a key to those crisis relief centers. And in both of them, in Phoenix and Tucson, roughly about 55% of the drop-offs 55% of the clients come from police drop-offs. And as I mentioned on these calls, the time for a peace officer drop-off at those facilities is less than 10 minutes. So it's a program and a type of treatment model that we support, and that bill is moving forward. Organized retail theft, Senate Bill 5160 is also on the second reading calendar in the Senate, and that is sponsored by Senator Torres. And it's a bill that we certainly support and hope that the body can find it in itself to move that bill off the Senate floor and over into the House as it relates to organized retail theft. And if anybody has any questions on the details of that bill, feel free to reach out to me and I'll give you kind of the once over. House bill or Senate Bill 5477, which is a bill that creates and implements the recommendations of the Washington State Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and People Task Force. Also sponsored by Senator Torres, is another piece of legislation that we support. And I'm going to encourage the House to continue to move that bill forward. And then finally, Senate Bill 5606, which is a piece of legislation sponsored by Senator Lovick that does a lot of things with illegal street racing, enhanced enforcement, enhanced impoundment, and the like. So I'm going to stop there, James and Marco, but I wanted to just again let folks know that there are other bills out there that we're certainly supportive of, and don't rise up to the high priority bills that were on our agenda. But again, just wanted to let everybody know that there are some other pieces of legislation out there that the FOP is either supporting or opposing, and that are continuing to move through the process, but again, don't rise to the level of being on our agenda, being a high priority. So I'll stop there, see if there are any questions, comments, concerns.
Nope. 18, are we ready to go around table for good of the order?
Yep.
Okay, Jeff, you want to start us off?
Yep, no, I'm all good. Thanks for the update, guys.
And my apologies at the start of the thing. I forgot to introduce Chad Pierschek, our state chaplain. Thanks for joining today. Chad, you got anything to add?
Nope. Apologies for the miscue on the login there. I'll get that squared away, but no, appreciate the work.
All good. Holt?
Nope, nothing today. Thank you.
Welcome Travis to the first meeting. Travis, you got anything to add?
No, thank you. And thank you for letting me join.
Yeah, no worries, anytime. Mr. David, you got anything to add?
No, sir. Another good Saturday morning. Thanks.
Okay. Marco?
Thanks, James. Michael, as always, for coming and taking time for Saturday. I know it's hard to do these Saturday meetings sometimes because it's really early, and it's people going into a weekend, some days off or whatever. So I appreciate you being here, and just remember that these, and Michael's said it before, that what we've talked about today, and supporting and not supporting, things are so fluid in the legislature that things can happen very, very quickly. So we'll give you the updates as best as we can to what we know at the time, but just know that things change very, very quickly, and we're on top of it. The legislative team is on top of it, and monitoring these things on a hourly basis at least. So anyway, I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay, I'll close this out, and just to recap some of the things we talked about today. We opposed 1025, we opposed 1513, we support 1445, we support the pursuit and the pursuit working group legislation that is in the House. And so if there's ever any question about what the FOP supports and why we support it, call us. You guys are all members. You guys, we work for you. We're a member-driven organization. I have one ask in return. Don't listen to people from the outside without giving us the benefit of the doubt. Remember, people outside the organization understand the position of the FOP, and sometimes they want the FOP to be with them, and they'll do what they can to get us to go that way by putting information out there that is I won't say false, but half truths and somewhat misleading. So, we're the most transparent law enforcement group out there. We'll tell you what we're doing and why we're doing it. You can always take part in the process on Tuesday mornings here, ask questions, tune in. Tune in to WAFOP TV. I want to thank Michael for all the hard work he's doing, the rest of the legislative team, and we'll see everybody next Saturday.
One more thing.
Go ahead, Michael.
Sorry, just to close this out. We've been working on a statement that we're going to put out as it relates to 1025 and 1445. So keep your eyes out for that. I'm hopeful that that's going to go out this morning.
Yep. And it's all about timing with that. Because that could potentially hit the House floor today. If you look at Twitter, a lot of other groups are telling people to call their legislators and talk about 1025. So I think Michael's right that there's potential for that to hit the floor today. So we will be on top of it. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everybody. See you next week.